The grammar of thought is to learn how the mind should work properly when it reasons. That's what the grammar of thought is. So this is called mantiq. Ibn Taymiyya wrote a book called Radd al Mantiqin. Even though he was a logician, he wrote a book called Refutation of the Logicians. Because he said, and this is a very interesting statement, he said, logic does not benefit stupid people, and it's superfluous for highly intelligent people. That is absolutely true. The problem is most of us fall in the bell curve, in that middle. And this is why the Sahaba didn't need mantiq, because the ones that were fuqaha and were reasoning with their brilliance. And so people that are highly intelligent generally don't need mantiq. But they still will benefit from this training, but they don't need it. So mantiq is to teach people of lesser capacity how to avoid pitfalls like hasty generalization. It's a logical fallacy in what's called material logic, because we do that naturally. I had 3 South Asian taxi drivers in New York. They all cheated me, so every South Asian is a cheat. That's obviously a fallacy. So but that's how the mind works. So that's his first book, and it's a brilliant book. We're actually, alhamdulillah, it's been translated and it's being edited now, and so we're actually, this is going to be part of the Zaytuna curriculum series. So alhamdulillah, that book should be out hopefully within the year. The second book he wrote, which is, I think, one of the most extraordinary books in ethics, and that is Mizan al-Amal, which is, so the Mi'yar al-Ilm is the standard of knowledge. Mizan al-Amal is the scales of action, so that you could weigh every action and determine whether the action was worthwhile or whether it wasn't. So it's a book of virtue ethics. It's a brilliant book. It's heavily influenced by the great polymath and Persian scholastic Raghib al-Isfahani, who wrote one of my favorite books, Al-Dhari'atu ila Makarim al-Sharia. So now, just in Iman, he wrote his 2 most important books. One is the abridged version, the other is more extensive, are Qawa'id al-Aqa'id and Al-Iqtisad fi al-I'tiqad. So economy in belief, and the other one is the principles of the axioms of creed. Now, so he has his project of introducing the approach using logic in scholastic theology. Now, it's important to remember, the last book that he wrote probably is called Iljam al-Awam an Ilm al-Kalam, not allowing common people to study theology. So he was not somebody that really encouraged, but he recognized that a certain group of scholars must learn this because it will enable them to refute the obfuscations and the attacks of the religion by people from outside. So for instance, right now we have all of these philosophers. We have deconstructionists, we have structuralists, we have post-modernists, we have post-colonialists, we have all these different, we have critical race theorists, we have all of these, and then we have also the analytic school. We have people that are working within that school, not just philosophers, theologians like Alvin Plantinga, who I was fortunate enough to be part of the award ceremony, a brilliant scholar working within a certain school of philosophy to defend faith. So he understood that you're always going to have these people out there who use their intellects and sophistry to confuse people. And if you don't have people trained to recognize it, to see it, and to be able to refute it, you're going to get into trouble. And what will happen is you will be left to the argument of blood. That's when you can't defend your religion with intelligence, the people that are zealots, that don't have the intelligence or the training to defend it, will end up defending it through violence. And that's not a defense of religion. Blood is no argument. So that's a really important thing to remember. Now in Islam, he took the abridgments of Imam al-Juwayni. Imam al-Juwayni wrote a famous book called Nihayat al-Matlab fi Dirayat al-Madhab in the Shafi'i fiqh. It's a very important book, but he takes it and he writes a long abridgment of it, a middle abridgment, and a short abridgment. Al-Basit, Al-Wasit, and Al-Wajiz. In fact, one of the Abu Hafs, Umar ibn Abdul Aziz al-Tarablasi, early on, only 10 years after the Imam died, he died. He said, "Shayyid al-madhhab habrun ahsan Allahu khalasa fi basitin wa wasitin wa wajizin wa khulasa." So these are the 4 books in Furu' that Imam al-Ghazali writes. The people who are Shafi'i know this. Imam al-Ghazali is the most important, after Imam al-Juwayni, I mean obviously the Imam himself, Imam Shafi'i, but all of the later books that come after, including Imam Nawawi, are all dependent on the books of Imam al-Ghazali. So these are foundational books in the madhab. This is in furu', not in usul. So this is in the branches of jurisprudence and not in the legal philosophy. Now in Ihsan, he writes a beautiful short book called Bidayat al-Hidayah, which is really to prepare a person for the spiritual path, to get you to be doing practices on a daily basis. But then he writes his Magisterial Ihya Ulum ad-Din, which is reviving the sciences of the religion. And I'm going to get into that. He then abridges it in Persian in a book called Kimya Sa'ada, The Alchemy of Happiness. And then, and this is the book, inshallah, I'm going to be talking about in a few days. He writes a book called Jawahir al-Quran. He writes it quite late. He's referencing all his other books in it. This book is his theory of the Quran. And what you realize from this book is his entire tradition revolves around the Quran. Everything the Imam was doing is really revolving around the Quran primarily, and then the Sunnah of the Prophet secondarily. So he is a jurist of the first order, and he brings his juristic worldview into the Quranic world and into the prophetic world, but it also is working in his theological perspective and in his spiritual perspective. Now, the third book is very interesting. It's called Kitab al-Arba'in fi Usul ad-Din. Again, it's relatively late. So these 3 are the abridgments. Actually, Jawahir al-Quran is 3 parts, and the third part is the Kitab al-Arba'in. This is the third part. So he said, when he wrote Jawahir al-Quran, he said, if you want, you can use this as a separate book. Because he wrote that, it was later published as a separate book, but it's actually part of the Jawahir al-Quran. So he shows you what the Quran is calling us to. And that is why his entire opus is basically a commentary on the Quran. And the prophetic life, as we know, is a commentary on the Quran. So it all goes back to the Book of Allah. The Prophet ﷺ Sunnah is an explanation of the Quran. Everything is from the Quran. It's all from the Quran. I'm not a Qurani. I'm 100% believe in the Kitab wa Sunnah. But the Sunnah is an explanation of the Quran. And we should understand that. You need the Sunnah. You can't understand the Quran without the Sunnah. And I'll talk about that. You mentioned a dialectical relationship between Imam al-Ghazali and Ibn Taymiyya. Could you expand on the nature of that relationship and their respective ideologies? Ibn Taymiyya is undeniably, he's a polymath. He was a brilliant scholar. He was a Hanbali. He was a faqih. He was also a comparative religionist. So he wrote books on the Old Testament and the New Testament. He has a 6-volume book that's very important. It's an extremely important book. He also wrote a book on Ta'arad al-Naql wal-Aql, a book on the problems of Naql and reason. Naql being what's transmitted, so revelation and reason. I think at the root of the difference is Ibn Taymiyya really wanted to just keep it at the book and the Sunnah. Like he did not want the type of edifice that was emerging out of the tradition of Islam. And in some ways you have to appreciate that, because there's something very profound about the simplicity of teachings. And in many ways, tradition becomes very cumbersome. And I think Kierkegaard has a very similar attitude towards what happens within Christianity. So I appreciate Ibn Taymiyya, I really do. I appreciate what he's trying to do. But I really feel like you cannot deny the human creativity that comes out of that initial inspiration. And you can't deny the fact that the Prophet ﷺ was a syncretist in that he said, seek knowledge. The Quran says, seek knowledge. It says, go out, explore the world. انظر كيف بدأ الخلق. Go look how creation began. That's a recommendation to go study geology. The Quran has history. It says, look at the people that went before you. The Quran certainly has metaphysics. So all of those are there, and so the elaborations that come out of that initial inspiration, what you want to do is mitigate the influences that are dangerous. And they're going to slip in, but you want to prevent them, and I think that was his project. I think, and I have to say this, and I'm not the first person that said this, but I think Imam al-Ghazali's, his intellect is just so vast. And I think Imam al-Subki, Sidi Ahmed Zarruq, and others said that Ibn Taymiyya was more reliable in his naql than in his actual, the way that he looked at the naql. So I think that's fundamentally at the heart of the differences. So like I said, I appreciate, and I actually understand what Ibn Taymiyya was trying to do, but I really think in the end, his project was a critical project. Like, he is criticizing a lot. Like, a lot of his books are criticizing. Imam al-Ghazali's project is a project he's building. Like, he's really trying to build a normative Islam that will withstand the onslaughts of materialism, of philosophy, of atheism, of all. That's what he's trying to do. He wants to build a fortress around the book and the Sunnah. Imam Ibn Taymiyya, he feels like the book and the Sunnah doesn't need a fortress. Imam al-Ghazali says, no, it needs a fortress, and I'm going to build it. And I think that's fundamentally the difference. Allahu A'lam. But we respect both of them. And traditionally, there were far more critics of Ibn Taymiyya in our ummah than there were of Imam. They both have critics. Far more are critical of Ibn Taymiyya's project than they are of Imam al-Ghazali's. But people are going to differ on this, and there's people that are going to stay with Ibn Taymiyya. I don't think it's like you have to choose one or the other, but I think you have to recognize that one of them defines the tradition, and that you do need to recognize. And arguably for 1,000 years, the Ummah considered it was Hujjat al-Islam. And it's interesting, he's called the proof of Islam. What do you use a proof for? You use a proof against people that are questioning you. Whereas Ibn Taymiyyah is called Shaykh al-Islam. He's one of many, but that is a laqab that he was given. So why was Imam al-Ghazali initially vilified by the scholars of Andalus and al-Maghrib? Well, I think I said that. They were, this is something that a Mauritanian friend of mine says, that the Murabitun were like the Taliban, which I don't think is totally fair. But they were very, in Kalam, they were dogmatic. They did not like speculative theology, and many scholars did not. Ibn Abdul Barr, who's one of my favorite scholars, he's one of the greatest scholars in the history of Islam, he attacks the Ash'ira terribly. I mean, he really, really just sees them as something really, really bad for Islam, like Ibn Taymiyyah. Although Ibn Taymiyyah, he's mixed, because sometimes he praises them and other times he condemns them, but he does recognize that they did play a role in defending Islam. So he's not entirely antagonistic. So these are debates amongst the ulama. His books were burnt at one point in Morocco, although the man that burnt him had a dream where the Prophet ___ came and had him flogged by Imam al-Ghazali, so he actually repented publicly for burning them. He burnt them in a masjid, and then he had that dream, and so he repented. That's a well-known story. Are there English translations of Imam Ghazali's works or other resources? Fortunately, he's been fortunate to have some good translators. There was a translation done. It's an abridgment of the Ihya that was done by Maulana. He was a South Asian scholar, Maulana Fadl Karim, I think, yeah. And that was reprinted by the Malaysians, and they edited a lot of it because he originally did not want it. He was actually a very formidable scholar. He did a commentary on the Mishkat al-Masabih. Translated the Ihya into Bengali, I think. So that is good. Fons Vitae has done some. I actually wrote the introduction to a couple of those books, including the Book of Knowledge, and then also the Islamic Text Society has done a good job. Dr. Winter, Abdul Hakim Winter, is I think a really excellent, beautiful stylist in the English language. And Imam al-Ghazali deserves a good translator because he is so eloquent in Arabic, and it's a crime to translate him poorly. I was recently reading a translation of one of his, I won't say who did it because he's actually a good scholar, but it was so bad. The English was so bad. And I felt sad for anybody who read that book and thought that in any way reflected the style of Imam al-Ghazali. So, and I know he's a great Persian stylist. I'm not able to read him in Persian, but I know from people that do know Persian that he's a beautiful stylist in Persian. So he was a very gifted orator, a gifted writer. So I would say that those are good. Dr. Winter did The Breaking of the Two Desires, was an excellent book, and I think he did one other. The Remembrance of Death. How can we pursue the spiritual path Imam al-Ghazali pursued today? Stay tuned. Because that's essentially what I'm going to talk about, really what his project is, because that is his project. And so, inshallah, if Allah gives us life, maybe we meet again. Did Imam al-Ghazali reject the relationship between cause and effect? I'll get into that a little bit. He did not. And that's one of the big problems. The Asha'ira are accused of being occasionalists, which are people that don't really believe in cause and effect. It's very important. It's a very sophisticated understanding. Cause and effect is the way Allah has created the world. It's the sunnah of God in the world. To deny it is to deny reality. And so we do not deny cause and effect, but we have, I think, a very profound understanding of the divine nature of what's happening in the world, and that's where the Imam al-Ghazali is a mystic. So I would look at it. You have Newtonian physics and you have quantum physics. Sharia is Newtonian. Haqiqa is quantum. This is an analogy. I'm not saying, don't say, oh, he said that Kalam is quantum physics. I'm saying that in the same way that the quantum laws do not work in the Newtonian world, that's the same that's happening. So it's two different ways. We have something called maratib al-wujud. We live in a multiplex universe. In fact, it's not a universe. It's a multiverse. And Rabbul Alameen, He's the Lord of all the worlds. So there are many worlds. Universe is this world. It's one world. But there are many universes. And so what we know, if you look at a Persian carpet, the ant knows nothing of the pattern of the Persian carpet. That is our intellect before the glory of Allah's creation. And the Prophet indicated that in a hadith about that the mulk in relation to the malakut was like a ring in the midst of a desert, a small ring. So so this whole idea, people lost their faith because they realized the universe is vast. Our Prophet ﷺ knew how vast things were. It increased his faith. This is something material say, why are there so many galaxies? Well, you can do the same thing if you go inward. Like, if you magnify yourself inwardly, you'll see the same number of miraculous, whether you go out or in. In fact, there's a Nobel Prize winner, Alexis Carrel, who showed basically that the largest things in the universe, if you take the largest things that we know of, and you take the smallest things we know of, and you add them together and divide them by 2, you get the basic human proportion. He won the Nobel Prize. So we are the microcosm. Like the cosmos is out there, but it's also in here. Everything's in here. And in fact, it couldn't be out there if it wasn't in here. That's how we can see it and understand it. So anyway, we'll get into that, inshallah. And then, did Imam al-Ghazali only acknowledge virtue ethics in his works? How about other normative ethical theories, such as consequentialism, deontological ethics? I mean, these are terms that come later. Islam does have a kind of deontological approach. I mean, we do believe in duty-bound ethics. And we also have consequentialist ethics, because there are situations where, like Kant said, you couldn't lie in any situation, right? And that's his deontological approach. But we know that lying is permitted to save somebody from a tyrant, for instance. So that's a kind of looking at the consequences. So I think the point of virtue ethics is the foundation of all ethics, and it has to be studied to understand cultivation of virtues and why it's important. So I think traditionally the virtue ethics has been the most important approach to ethics in our tradition. Can you please recommend an introductory book on the Quran that one can share with non-Muslims? The Quran, I found it's very interesting. Quran, I would not recommend a non-Muslim reading the Quran because it's such a difficult book in translation. First of all, it's a non-linear book, but second of all, there's a lot of lacunae in the Quran. And I actually had a young Singaporean, really wonderful Muslim lady that worked with us with the Rihla group when we were in Singapore. And she was very troubled. She had taken a course in university, and the course made an argument that the Quran needed, that it needed commentary. And she was like, why would God reveal a book that is not sufficient unto itself? And initially I didn't really have an answer for her. I didn't give her an answer. I just thought about it. But I actually realized, إِنَّهُ ذِكْرٌ لَكَ وَلِقَوْمِكَ. It's a reminder for you and for your people. Imam Malik said that is saying so-and-so on so-and-so on so-and-so. That Allah has made His book impossible to reach without the intercession of scholars, of the Warathatul Anbiya. So you cannot understand the Quran without the Prophet ﷺ, and you cannot understand the Prophet ﷺ without the scholars. So you always need commentary. And that is because the meanings of the Quran are locked in the hearts of human beings. And it is men and women sometimes, but it's men like Imam al-Ghazali who unlocked many of the mysteries of that book. And that's what we're going to look at with Jawahir al-Quran. But before we do that, I have a few more things I want to say about the Imam. So inshallah, may Allah bless all of you. I hope you remember all of us at Iftar. Remember Zaytuna, all the people at Zaytuna. Also support Zaytuna, inshallah. We have some really, really big plans, but we need your help to do what we're doing. May Allah bless all of you, and thank you. Subhanakallahumma wa bihamdika, ashhadu an la